Good afternoon. Brian, this video is for you. I decided that we should do a instructional video on how to create curriculum so that all three of us could be on the same page as we try to develop our 12 modules for Mind University. Hence, this video, because it's also modeling a possible way of doing our online Mind University courses. We have a PowerPoint, we have a script, but we have the flexibility to talk directly to camera and make it more personal. So Andrew is behind the camera, and we're going to be trying this technique of face lecture, showing you the slides. If necessary, we can always insert a slide directly into the finished video if it's not clear enough. So, how to develop curriculum. This is the topic of today's lecture. So Mind University has a promise to its students. What we have told them is that we are going to teach them how to become mental decathletes. That, in fact, is the final goal of the entire 12-module course. And in order to do justice to a curriculum, we have to keep that in mind at all times on every part of the curriculum development, because this, in effect, is our destination. Our destination is called the final course goal, which is to teach them the attributes of being a mental decathlete. So every decision about what to include in the content of each module has to relate directly to the final goal, which is attributes of mental decathlete. That's the most important thing to keep in mind. Here are the attributes that we've decided are the fundamental attributes of a mental decathlete. So these are 10 attitudes of mind. And as we begin to develop the content, we may need to unpack these even more than we've already done. We may need to expand upon them, categorize them, classify them in some other ways. But these are the 10 fundamental attitudes of mind that we have chosen based on other research that suggests that these are, in fact, the fundamental characteristics of good thinking. So this is where we're going to begin. Now, we've also told our participants that we have 4 different ways of looking at a mental decathlete. We have the data gathering detective in the guise of Sherlock Holmes. We have the brilliant analytical mind of a scientist like an Einstein. We have the fierce clarity and decision-making ability of a warrior, and the intuitive creative capacity of the artist. So we've already begun to introduce the idea that there are archetypes of a mental decathlete, and that certain attributes fall into one of these 4 categories. That's something that I think we're going to want to pick up on in our curriculum development, because 4 is easier to remember than 12. So anytime you create a classification system, that's a helpful cognitive guide or aid to the students. So here are the 10 mental attributes that we talked about and devised with a little bit more verbiage on what each of them is. At the time that we were thinking of offering badges, I created these little icons as a working model of a quick and easy identification tool. These can certainly be changed, but this was my shortcut at the time. Again, icons are useful because the visual image, once linked to the verbal concept, can then stand in for that concept and be picked up and integrated in the fraction of the time it takes to reread the sentence or paragraph. So here again, let's return to how do you do good curriculum design. To do good curriculum design, and this is now from the viewpoint of someone working in higher education and academia for decades, it's something called backward design, which means you begin not at the beginning, you begin at the end. You say to yourself, what's the destination? What's the goal? What do my students need to know? What skills do they have to have? What tools do they need to access to be able to arrive at the destination? So I like the image here of helping someone up a mountain. The top of the mountain is the destination. What are all the things they need to be able to know and to do and to have with them in order to get to the top of the mountain? That's the guide for how we're going to build our curriculum. So the real moral here is that good teaching requires that you begin with the end in mind, which means not what do you want to teach them, but what do they need to learn. And that's a huge mindset that spins things in a very different way. Because for performers, lecturers, lawyers, there's a tendency to know what you already know and what it is that you want to say. As a storyteller, that's your impetus. But the educator needs to be disciplined in a very different way. You need to be able to constantly put yourself in the user's mind, the student's mind, and ask, what scaffolding needs to be in place to move this student's mind from position A to position B, from position B to position C, from position C to position D. So the increments of learning from where they're beginning, not where you're beginning, from where they're beginning to the ultimate destination is how we have to think about curriculum design. Now here is going to be one of the most useful graphs that we have for doing our curriculum design. This is a chart that lists the 10 mental attributes of a mental decathlete in the left-hand column. And then it shows those 3 categories which we are going to have to cover in every single module. The first is the knowledge category, right? We've told our participants that Mind University will give them the knowledge, the skills, and the tools to become a mental decathlete, to have full mind utilization. What does that actually mean, to have the knowledge, the skills, and the tools? The knowledge are the facts, the processes, the stories, and the meaning that we're trying to share. The skills are going to involve introspective skills, personal kinds of reflection, relational or interpersonal skills. It's going to require shifts of attitude, shifts of emotional response, and finally, metacognition, metadata. The tools, what we're talking about there is the embedded or extended mind theory, that we're not just trying to hold all of this in our minds or have them hold it in their minds. We need to give them tools. We need to give them apps, hardware, software, charts, various handouts, gadgets, ways for them to take all of this data, this new information, and use it appropriately and without too much overload. So that's important. The most important column in this graph, though, is the last one. It's the assessment column, because before you can add any content to any module, you ask the all-important question, how will I know that the student has acquired the knowledge and the skills and the tools that I'm offering? Because unless we have some way of assessing the answer to that question, we don't know if we've done it right. We have no way of knowing if we're successful. So for each of these attributes, we have to discern what would be a way to assess whether or not one of our participants has mastered the knowledge and the skills and the tools necessary for integrating that attribute into their own toolbox as a mental decathlete. So this is where we have to start, is the assessment column. Once we have got an assessment in mind that we think has enough scale, variety, and precision to measure each of these pieces of an attribute, then we can go back and begin putting content into the module to make sure that we are, in a sense, that we're teaching to the assessment. so that what we're giving them is exactly what we're going to ask them to show us at the end of the module. So let me give you an example for this. So again, our promise to each of the students is that after completing the course, they will become a mental decathlete. In order to make good on that promise, the creation of the content has to follow the backward design principle, which is that know what the destination is, know how you're going to assess whether or not the student has acquired the knowledge, skills, and tools necessary to reach the destination, and then plan your content delivery in an appropriate packaging and sequencing so that the student can make that transition. Here is the critical column again. Plan with the assessment first. Now the tools that I've been using to make this presentation of knowledge and skills are critical to the success of our endeavor here. Bloom's taxonomy of the cognitive domain is something I've mentioned before, and this shows sort of the layering of cognitive abilities and skills in the hierarchy that Bloom and his colleagues discovered that the mind works. So layering on facts that you can remember, to concepts that you understand, to examples, and then testing to see if you can apply those concepts in other arenas, to your ability to analyze and take apart the concepts, your ability to assess and bring in your own affective and ethical ideas around it. And finally, the highest level here is the ability to create something new in the world. In addition to the cognitive domain, Bloom has a domain of the affective, which is going to be equally important because, as you recall, we are asserting that the ability to understand and work with your emotions is a critical piece of becoming a mental decathlete. That it's not sufficient to simply think with a left brain analytical kind of mentality. One has to be constantly dipping into one's emotional body to pick up those clues and influences and use it appropriately to guide your thinking. So here is the taxonomy of the affective domain. So both of these tools are going to be essential in the building out of our curriculum. So I want to suggest that what I'm doing right here is a perfect example of the process of taking a destination, that is a goal, and working backwards through an assessment to look at those content pieces of knowledge, skills, and tools necessary to reach the destination. In this case, our destination is building a curriculum. The assessment that I'm going to use for that goal is, can Rebecca create a curriculum? All right, so that's the assessment. If I can create a curriculum, a good curriculum, then we'll know that I've got the necessary knowledge, skills, and tools to meet that goal. So here we are. I pulled out of our mental decathlete attributes the 3 attributes that I think are most significant in these early stages of building a curriculum. And I've now drilled down so that I can get closer to what content I would want to set up for myself as the demonstration student. The analytical skill here is that I need to have knowledge of the backward design model. I need to know what that is, what the components are. I need to have some experience of having taught and be able to assess, to access the memories of having taught before, the styles I used, and what worked and what didn't work, so that I can move into this new model with some analogies and experience. And finally, I need, and I would hope that we train our students to demand the research that backs up these claims, that backward design works. Don't just take it on faith, right? That's part of the skeptic. No, show me why it's better to design with the end in mind than to start at the beginning. The attribute of being disciplined was really important because Andrew and I thought we would start this last night. We were just going to jump in and tackle Module 1, which you had sent us some ideas for. But the discipline that occurred to me was this. I know that that's not the right way to do curriculum design, and yet it seemed easier. You'd already sent us something, we could just kind of fall into it and push some parts around, but that's not the way to do it. If you know something, you have to do it right. But then I realized it's late at night, I'm tired, we're going to have to sleep on this. This is a huge task to think of how to design a curriculum of this magnitude with 12 modules. How do I set up the physical so that it really supports me in doing a project of this size? Get a good night's sleep, wake up, have some breakfast, have some coffee. And what are the tools that I need to put in place? What is my preferred methodology? For me, I need a lot of images. I need to have content where I can see it, maybe multiple screens, maybe some printouts so that I have access to the tools that will help me with this mental process. And finally, the empathic. I need to remember to get out of my teacher hat and into my student hat often enough that I'm constantly checking to make sure that what I'm presenting is going to meet the listener/viewer in a way that's most helpful to them. So this is an example of how to hardwire all of these ideas into the curriculum development. So here's these same pieces here, and let me show you how I went about this. Now, if I were going to design this, the first thing I would say is, okay, so in this module, which is about designing curriculum, I need to present them with the backward design method. I can do that as a handout, as a book, as a YouTube video, whatever, but that's a piece of knowledge that they have to have. They need to have the taxonomy of cognitive domain and of the affective domain. So now I have some content. That's part of what is going to have to be here. Tools. I want the chart of the decathlete attributes. I mean, that's the first thing, because otherwise I don't know what the destination is. I don't know what I'm building towards. The tool of a large whiteboard or something like a PowerPoint, because information, infographics, these are really helpful to me. The skill, the physical preparedness I talked about before, and as we know, this is critical for a lot of people. The desire to start at the beginning, in fact, is a kind of a cognitive bias. We want to jump in where it's easiest, where the water is shallow, but this is a deep problem. It's got a lot of moving parts, and I need to resist the temptation to make it easy for myself and accept what the task really is. And finally, the preferred process for working. This is part of that introspective ability to know yourself, to have the best pieces in play. So, heading towards being a mental decathlete for ourselves and our students, using this model to create our curriculum step by step, getting all of our assessments ticked off appropriately before we even think about content, is going to take us finally into something we can proudly call our Mind University. And that concludes today's lecture demonstration of how to create a curriculum.